The Honourable the Vice President.
Senator Ameen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, and I welcome you to the chair this afternoon. Mr. Vice President, as we contribute to this debate, I want to first of all thank Senator Wade Mark for bringing a debate on the oversight for the Election and Boundaries Commission. As in Trinidad and Tobago, we have two elections close by. We have the local government elections, which are due shortly, and we have a general election in 2020 that will be a deciding factor for all citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. And we want to be sure, in fact, we are not the only ones in the UNC, all citizens would want to be sure that we have a free and fair election, an election free from fear in Trinidad and Tobago. And so I think it is very timely for us to look at the oversight mechanisms utilized, or the absence of oversight mechanisms where our election and boundaries is concerned. And there's an ongoing debate over what a single universal definition of electoral integrity is, but it can generally be defined as any election that is based on the democratic principles of universal suffrage and political equality as reflected in international standards and agreements, and is professional, impartial, and transparent in its preparation and administration throughout the electoral cycle. And Mr. Vice President, without electoral integrity, leaders in our country and officials will lack the accountability to the public. The confidence in the election must be strong, and the confidence in the results of the election must be strong in order for the public to have trust in the officials who are elected through the process. It gives legitimacy to our government. Electoral integrity allows for peaceful resolution of conflict, for open dialogue, for debate, for information sharing among leaders and the public. And integrity depends on public confidence in the electoral and political processes. To ensure that elections have integrity, there are other factors outside of the electoral institutions themselves that need to be taken into account and strengthened. Election officials, judges, and courts must have the independence and the protection that is respected by the citizens, by the public, as well as from persons who are from the international community. Mr. Vice President, I am concerned that the debate is going into one side, sounding as though they are defending themselves. But we have only heard from one speaker on the government bench. So I trust that that is not the direction. But I want to just correct for the record a reference made by the leader of government business. I'm sorry, he's out of the chamber now. And it was in reference to the term gerrymandering. It was not named after. I know he made some reference to an Irish official or an Irish politician. In fact, it moved to the process of gerrymandering moved to Ireland much later. And the gerrymandering refers to the drawing of lines to secure partisan advantage. And it was named after former governor of Massachusetts, who served in 1812. His name was Elbridge Gerry. And the term was the combination of his last name, Gerry, and the word salamander, which is a type of snake, because of the eventual shape of one of the electoral districts. That was just impossible if you really considered natural lines. And this is registered in the Smithsonian in terms of history and so on. And there's a lot of discussion and academic papers with regards to gerrymandering. And for governments or politicians to be inclined towards gerrymandering is something that is discussed in many nations when you deal with fair elections and boundary controls. So, so I just wanted to bring that on the record for the benefit of the member. And I'm sure I didn't mean to mislead or anything. But, Mr. Vice President, I also noted that, and I was a bit surprised, I don't know if the leader of government business in responding was sharing his own personal opinion as opposed to their party's position on oversight for the EBC by Parliament, which is what this motion asked for. I want to quote present Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, and this quote comes from a Hansard of March 23rd, 2001. And on behalf of the PNM bench at the time, Mr. Imbert said, and I quote, "I am sorry. I am afraid I have absolutely no confidence in the Election and Boundaries Commission. Himself cannot improve himself. I have no confidence in the Election and Boundaries Commission to do any countrywide electoral registration unless it is done under the scrutiny of the political parties, whether it be the People's National Movement, the NAR, or any other political parties." That is an absolute opposite to what was stated a short while ago by the leader of government business. They are claiming that the PNM has, in all of its history, has absolute confidence in the Election and Boundaries Commission. He is either uninformed or telling an untruth. And Mr. Vice President, the record will state the position of the PNM when it is convenient to them. When it is convenient to them. Mr. Vice President, the Election and Boundaries Commission, as with any other institution in Trinidad and Tobago, must be empowered, it must be protected, but it must also be accountable to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The EBC is funded by taxpayers' dollars, and this motion asks for the EBC to account to an independent body, this Parliament, the highest office of the land, on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is what this motion calls for. This motion, Mr. Vice President, cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that the employees of the EBC are human beings. Human beings are prone to errors. Human beings are also prone to corruption. We cannot accuse or defend the members of the EBC if we do not have transparency and accountability. It is not impossible, Mr. Vice President, for any staff member of the Election and Boundaries Commission, as with a member of any other service commission or any other state enterprise or any other place where human beings function, to become corrupt. It is not impossible. So we cannot pretend that the EBC cannot possibly have corrupt officials in its ranks. And, Mr. Vice President, we also have to look at the history of errors that lead to the need for accountability and scrutiny. Up to this day, Mr. Vice President, no one can answer as to who requested the 1-hour extension in the 2015 general election, who approved it, and on what basis it was approved. An illegal decision. A decision that the court indicated was unconstitutional.
Unilateral decision.
Mr. Vice President, that is not the only example. We are still awaiting answers, and a joint select committee or an inquiry that would allow the Election and Boundaries Commissioners, senior staff members to come before Parliament, would have allowed an explanation, would have allowed questions from the public, questions from the members of the panel to air that matter. We do not have that mechanism in place, and that is something that this motion asks for. I don't see why the members of the government need to object to such a request. Why would they object to greater transparency and accountability for the Election and Boundaries Commission that the leader of government business claim they have full confidence in? If you have full confidence in the Election and Boundaries Commission, you will have no problem with it accounting to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, the member of the leader of government business also mentioned the issue that came to the public's attention recently with regards to a fake ID card. And I am a little bit disappointed that he sounded as though he felt it was something trivial. But Mr. Vice President, I want to just expand on the issue and say why it cannot be taken lightly and it should not be swept under the carpet. First of all, it was thanks to social media. It was thanks to the UNC and thanks to the leader of opposition highlighting this matter on a public platform that it came to the public's attention and elicited a response by way of a statement from the Election and Boundaries Commission to say that there was no such record of that person on their database and that no card was issued in that name. And Mr. Vice President, and that was the end of that. Yep. It is our view, Mr. Vice President, that this matter must be thoroughly investigated and it should not be swept under the rug with an overnight investigation and a dismissal by a typewritten statement issued to the public. It also brings another issue to the forefront. We cannot, Mr. Vice President, have himself investigating himself and then declaring himself innocent or not guilty of any wrongdoing. And that is, I suspect, what the Honorable Colm Imbert in 2001 was referring to when he indicated that we must have scrutiny for the Election and Boundaries Commission. Who determines what type of investigation should take place into any allegation in the Election and Boundaries Commission? A few people to exonerate themselves, or when I say themselves, not themselves personally, but the organization. That is something we have to guard against. Especially when, Mr. Vice President, you can have profound effects on the outcome of an election and the composition of the Parliament based on what goes on there. Mr. Vice President, I think there's need for a serious investigation into that matter. I want to say that for the record. I think there should be a forensic investigation. I also personally suspect that that may not be the only case of, that is not the only case of fake ID. And I think there are other people in the public domain who have alluded to the fact that there have been instances of fake ID card. A press release, Mr. Vice President, saying that an investigation has been done is not enough. This motion calls for accountability. When is that report due? What is the mandate? This is a matter about public confidence in one of the most critical institutions in this country. If we have to take a closer look at I want to take a closer look at the ID card issue and tie it in, because in the early, Mr. Vice President, in my opening remarks, I spoke about connection to other things. But with regards to that could impact on the electoral process, but is not only under the full control of the Election and Boundaries Commission, and why we must have transparency. So this ID card was issued to a Venezuelan national. On the back of the ID card, where there are the details and so on, it says that the ID card was issued on the 10th of August, 2016, and it lists the person as living in Chaguanas. When we look at the passport bio page, which was publicized of that same person, Juan Luis Marcano Navarro, the passport is a Venezuelan passport that was issued on the 21st of June, 2016. So it became very clear and apparent to those who saw the publication, and they would have asked, how does a Venezuelan national who has a bona fide Venezuelan passport, which lists his birthplace as Venezuela, now hold a Trinidad and Tobago identification card with his birthplace being listed as Chaguanas? But it goes further, Mr. Vice President. On the political platform, as political parties do, the Honorable Prime Minister was heard in Chaguanas East, saying that the PNM is looking to capture the marginal constituency of Chaguanas East.
Yeah, they can't get that far.
Is this, Mr. Vice?
So I'm listening. And I am picking up the argument that you're making and where you were tying it to the motion that is before us. But the comments that you're making now, and if I'm extrapolating as to where it's going, be very careful.
Certainly.
Because it will breach imputation of improper motives. So I understand exactly what you're trying to say. It's a breach of the standing order in relation to imputing improper motives. So move on from that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, every political party, even those who lost the deposit, go on the platforms and they claim they're going to win the election. They claim they are going to win. So every political party could make that claim. But Mr. Vice President, when we look at the bigger picture, questions arise, and we must find ways to have those answers ventilated properly. And that is where our motion comes in, with the need for oversight. Mr. Vice President, Senator Khan also asked in his presentation, Minister Khan, how could the PNM steal the elections?
Quite simple.
And I just want to refer to another matter that does not fall under the purview of the Election and Boundaries Commission directly, but has an impact on the registration process. And again, we have no mechanism to ask questions or to have oversight. At the beginning of this year, January 19, 2019, Sunday Express, there was an expose of persons selling birth certificates. We know that birth certificates are one of the key documents you need to register with the Election and Boundaries Commission. And the article spoke about Venezuelan nationals being provided with false birth papers at the cost of $3,500. 2 days later, in the Parliament, there was an answer to a question from the opposition, where the Attorney General indicated that investigations were in fact launched. And subsequently, we found out that staff from that unit had been reassigned. So, but we are yet to hear, Mr. Vice President, what has become of that case? How many birth certificates in this country has been sold? Who has been held accountable? Many of those persons with birth certificates could have gone to the EBC and be registered legitimately, yes, with these falsely issued birth certificates. That would not show up as a fake ID. The Attorney General has disputed only some of the information. He has indicated that staff has been reassigned but not whether there's an investigation, whether it is complete, whether those persons who have faced wrongdoing are going to face the law. And we have to ask ourselves, with this racket that seems to be continuing, how many other cases of Louis Navarro are there in Trinidad and Tobago? We have to connect the dots, Mr. Vice President. We cannot pretend that all is well because an institution is supposed to be independent. We have to allow the scrutiny. Mr. Vice President, the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, the leader of government business, referred to the case of San Fernando East, San Fernando West. In that area, the EBC moved 4 polling divisions from San Fernando East into San Fernando West. And in my personal view, it benefits the PNM. No, Mr. Vice President, and I'm saying that based on my knowledge of the data from the election results. All right? These 2 polling divisions were moved prior to the 2015 general elections. And there are 2 more in our recent report that are proposed to be moved for the 2020 general elections. There are 3 polling divisions from the Oropuch East that were moved into San Fernando East, and then 2 from San Fernando East that were moved into San Fernando West prior to the general election 2015. So Mr. Vice President, I am creating a scenario to further endorse the fact that we have no way of getting an input or getting answers. So San Fernando East had too many voters based on the regulations that indicates the maximum and the minimum number of electors per constituency. San Fernando West had too many voters. Oropuch East is closer to the higher limit that is permissible in the law. And quite frankly, there are many scenarios that could have been recommended to the commissioners for them to make a decision in terms of how to change the boundaries. And this is where, Mr. Vice President, I want to be very clear. I am not accusing the commissioners of any partisan wrongdoing. I want to be very clear. I am creating a scenario for us to acknowledge the fact that there is room for criticism. There is room for us to ensure that the decisions, the recommendations made, even though they may have some technical backing, the fact is that they are subjective. The fact is that they could go either way. But the eventual decision of the EBC could have moved, and I hope, and people who live in that area will follow, they could have moved 1 polling division from Oropuch East into San Fernando East, and 2 polling divisions from Oropuch East into San Fernando West, and rectify the situation, and have all those 3 polling divisions, all those 3 constituencies fall within the recommended amount. But instead, what happened? They are neighboring. They share the same boundary. As I said, those who are familiar with the area would know that they share the same boundary, right? But another scenario could have taken place, Mr. Vice President. Instead, they moved 3 polling divisions from Oropuch East into San Fernando East, and then moved 2 of the strong PNM PDs, and I'm saying, let me rephrase, 2 of the PDs that the PNM has a history of winning from San Fernando East into San Fernando West. That is the decision they ended up taking. And I know that the commissioners will indicate they do not make decisions based on the election results. But the fact is that the election results happen by polling division.
What about Barataria?
So the question could be asked, the EBC could have instead moved the polling divisions from Oropuch East directly into San Fernando West. Those polling divisions that the UNC usually wins could have gone into San Fernando West because they share a border. Those two seats share a border. Is it that their decision was not, well, if I ask the question, it is not making an accusation, but is it that those two polling divisions are two strong UNC polling divisions? So the Oropouche voters in San Fernando East, they put Oropouche voters in San Fernando East, where it would not disturb the majority by which the PNM wins the San Fernando East. It does not disturb the PNM safe seat. And they put a strong PNM PD from San Fernando East into San Fernando West. And that, Mr. Vice President, will, whether it was the intention of the EBC or not, help to strengthen the PNM's outcome in San Fernando West. That is what it does essentially. And there was no cause, in my humble view, to place an extra 2 PDs from Oropouche East into San Fernando East and then go and take out the same number of PDs from San Fernando East to put it in San Fernando West.
Understanding what you're saying, and you're utilizing the report that you mentioned and what is stated in the report. What is starting to happen is that that particular point that you're making is starting to get extended. As much as you're indicating what polling divisions are moved where, and in your opinion, what is happening and why, what starts to happen is that that point starts to get drawn out. Yes. So I'd ask you to wrap up that point, because as much as the report itself does tie into what the motion says, the entire debate cannot be just on that report. Understand what I'm saying? Continue.
Certainly. This is only, thank you, Mr. Vice President, this is only a small part of my contribution, but I thank you for allowing me to take the opportunity to explain clearly the scenario, and I really tried to compact it as much as I could. But I think I have sufficiently and clearly explained the bias that I have seen and why we need to have the EBC come before Parliament so that we can answer questions concerning the scenarios that are possible and why they did not take them. Mr. Vice President, I have also examined the report with regards to the local boundary changes, and there are a number of concerns I have in the recent seat that was recently fought in Barataria. I will not go into the specifics. The UNC recently won the Barataria seat in the by-election. It is now to experience a boundary change. There's a new seat in San Juan East. In Siparia Regional Corporation, there is another area where one seat, that is a corporation where the UNC has a 1-seat majority. And again, the changes there are of concern to me because there are several scenarios that does not necessarily have to interfere with what the outcome in terms of the results could be, but it could level the electoral population as is required by the EBC's regulation. So you could attain the objective of leveling the number of electors without significantly interfering with the voter outcome. So, Mr. Vice President, along with this, I mean, we are going into an election period. We have had major accusations. We have had commissions of inquiries. We have had investigations of other types into other matters which impact on influencing election results. And those, we spoke about the things that EBC is directly responsible for, such as the boundaries, such as the registration of persons. We spoke about the birth certificates. I spoke about the birth certificates. But there are also instances of and accusations of house padding, using resources of the state, the registration of non-national voters, which I spoke about, And Mr. Vice President, all of those things exist as hard, stubborn facts. And we cannot be ignorant and pretend or they do not exist. We must connect the dots and we must bring things to the fore and let there be transparency. Mr. Vice President, I have also several recommendations that I just want to quickly put on record. First of all, I think we could all, as legislators, as persons who experience the electoral process in some way, acknowledge the fact that the Representation of the People Act, which governs the Election and Boundaries Commission and the electoral process, is quite dated. There have been some amendments over the years, but I think the Minister could agree that there is need for review of that legislation. And that is actually something that I think the commissioners are also in support of. And we must have proper consultation with the legal recommendations coming forward. I got the impression that the Minister felt that, I don't know, you made a comment, you said leave it so. I don't think you were referring to the legislation, were you? You know, that the existing legislation, that it has been working, so we should leave it so. All right. So I think basically you are saying that the process, not just the legislation, but that the process, this process has been working. You have an independent Election and Boundaries Commission that you do not have oversight and that you see no problem with that, and you should leave it so. But I beg to differ. I strongly beg to differ. But despite the possible political ramifications of the process and the fact that the majority of the world's countries undertake periodic changing of their electoral boundary, very little or nothing by way of recommendations or international standards has been proposed by the other side in this debate. And it's important, Madam President, for us to have standards. Let us start with using international standards, seeing what is suitable to Trinidad and Tobago, because they will direct public expectations. They will serve as a target for reformers, for legal recommendations, to aspire to, when we have a benchmark for the stakeholders in the electoral process in this country, to gauge the fairness of any change in boundaries or any changes in the practices that presently govern elections. Just for the record, some international election standards have been proposed by regional and non-governmental organizations to guide what they call delimitation process, which is the process of changing boundaries. And these organizations include the OSCE, the European Commission for Democracy Through Law, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Electoral Institution of Southern Africa. The proposed international standards for delimiting electoral boundaries provides a list of the standards and guidelines suggested by these entities. I am sure that officials at the Election and Boundaries Commission would have had sight of these recommendations, may have had some sharing of thoughts with regards to its suitability in Trinidad and Tobago. But Madam President, I acknowledge the change in the chair. Madam President, there is no space, there is no room for that change, that recommendation for change to come. A number of the proposed guidelines are in fact narrowly focused and less than universally applicable. In other instances, important guiding principles have been neglected. Many of these many of these proposed standards have fundamental principles that I am sure all of us in this House, in this Senate, government, opposition, and independent bench would agree to. So that is a place of common ground for us to start. Impartiality, the boundary authority, the election and boundaries must be must be independent, it must be professional, equality in terms of the population of constituencies, that it should be equal as possible to provide voters with equality of voting strength, representativeness, constituencies should be drawn, taking into account cohesive communities, defined by such factors as administrative boundaries, geographic features, and community interest. This, Madam President, is actually a passion of mine because I believe in communities and keeping communities together. And I have identified a number of areas where changes in boundaries actually separate communities so badly by polling division, and then one polling division ends up in one electoral district where that community has no social connection, and the rest of the community is in another electoral district. And Madam Vice President, Madam President, that is something I think we must be, or any authority in changing boundaries must be, be mindful of.
Senator Ameen, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. Non-discrimination, the delimitation process should be devoid of electoral boundary manipulation that discriminates against voters on account of race, color, language, religion, or related status. We can all agree to that. Then, Madam President, I am sure we can then also all agree to transparency. The delimitation process should be as transparent and accessible to the public as possible. And that is what this motion asks for. So it is not a motion for the PNM or the government members to come and defend themselves against any accusation that they're in cahoots with anyone to steal any election or anything. If you, as I say, if you have nothing to hide, then you have no problem with transparency. No impartial body. I agree that we should maintain the independence of the election and boundaries or whatever authority. It must be independent, it must be professional, it must not be aligned with any particular political party. But being impartial does not mean that you are above the law or beyond accountability. There are other schools of thought that you should have representatives of political parties sit on the board as, well, there are different suggestions in terms of being members, in terms of being non-voting members, but being able to sit with the board and make and contribute to decisions or discussions. So there are models that are available that would allow greater input. At present, our system, whether it is a political party or another, or a citizen, a general citizen, while you can make an objection to the EBC, it still is that the EBC decides on the eventual outcome, himself unto himself. That is not fairness, that is not justice. There are a number of other instances that I wanted to share, but I just want to mention where there are many countries, including Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, and the UK, where members of the judiciary are also represented on boundary commissions in those countries. There are some countries who do not allow legislators or representatives of political parties on their boundary commissions at all, because they want to maintain the political neutrality, which is what the essence of our Trinidad law is. But New Zealand is one exception that I want to mention, where 2 political appointees, one is a representative for the governing party and one is for the opposition. So those are models that are available to us. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into it, but I want to dispute vehemently an accusation made by the leader of government business. He cried out that the UNC has intention of mashing up things, of destroying independent bodies in this country, independent institutions. And I want to call for him a list and I'm sorry I don't have time to call more things on this list, a list of things that the UNC destroyed. If you want to properly accuse the UNC destroyed the fake oil scandal that was going on. The UNC destroyed the secret wire transfers. The UNC destroyed the sex scandals involving senior government officials that has yet to come out, where the investigation are yet to come out. The UNC also exposed and destroyed the rental of buildings by senior government officials in Trinidad and Tobago. The UNC will continue to stand, Madam President, for transparency, for fairness, and for accountability. We will not be intimidated. We will not be intimidated by anyone accusing the UNC of whatever you're trying to, it seemed to me, to accuse us of. I think, Madam President, when we shy away from criticizing agencies that are supposed to be impartial, we allow ourselves to be intimidated from speaking up for fairness. And I am not, and the UNC is not, going to be intimidated by the PNM and the accusation. The Election and Boundaries Commission is not above the law, and I am in full support of this motion that simply calls for transparency. Yeah. I thank you.
Senator Cummings.
Madam President, I thank you. I thank you for this opportunity to join this debate on this motion. I am from Cuba, Madam President.
Senator Cummings, please do not be shouting across the floor. Okay? Senator Cummings, continue.
Thank you, Madam President. As I was saying, I'm from Cuba. The UNC had its headquarters there. I think they were evicted. But I understand the UNC very well. You had your time. Be quiet, please. And, Madam President, when I read this motion, what I can see in this motion is panic, is excuse, and a clear indication that the advisors to the UNC have advised them to start to make early excuses. Early excuses for what is likely to be another defeat for them at the polls. What are the facts, Madam President? The EBC, one of the institutions that have served us well. I mean, Senator Mark knows this. Senator Mark has contested several elections in Trinidad and Tobago. Hasn't been very successful at it. But the fact is he took part in a process, and even in defeat at those elections, I cannot remember Senator Mark claiming that the EBC was not conducting free and fair elections in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is what we are about discussing, Madam President. Even, I will not go way back. I'm just going to 1986. We have had elections in this country time and time again, managed by the Election and Boundaries Commission, which according to the Constitution should not be subject to the direction or control of any person or any authority. And in that model, we have had free and fair elections time after time after time in this country. We have governments have changed peacefully as the country accepted the results given at each election. In 1986, the PNM, we were in power for decades. And in 86, an election was held. The PNM lost those elections. 33-3, demitted office. The UNC was, well, then the ULF was part of the coalition that won. I did not hear them complain that the elections were not free and fair. They were happy to go into office. Government changed hands in 1991 and the PNM came back into power. In 1995, we had general elections, 17-17-2. the UNC went into office in an accommodation, no complaint about the EBC. In 2000, the UNC won the elections and accepted the results, no complaint about the EBC. In 2001, 1818, well, they cried about that, but they did not complain about the EBC. In 2002, the PNM won the elections, the UNC demitted office and went peacefully into opposition, and no complaint about the EBC. In 2007, the PNM won again, and the UNC continued in opposition. No complaint about the EBC, Madam President. In 2010, the UNC won the elections and went into government, did not perform too well. So in 2015, they were voted out again. No complaint about the EBC. We have full confidence in the Election and Boundaries Commission as an institution that has served the people of Trinidad and Tobago well. The PNM has full confidence, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago has full confidence in the EBC. But not only locally. Let me draw your attention, Madam President, to the Commonwealth Observer Group, headed by Sir Paul Tover in 2015. And on their arrival, here's what the chairman had to say. Trinidad and Tobago, this is September 2015, has a track record of credible elections, and the Commonwealth is committed to continuing its support of the country's democratic processes. Commonwealth observers were deployed to the country's general elections in 2000 as well. He goes on to say, we will assess whether the elections have been conducted according to the standards for democratic elections to which Trinidad and Tobago has committed itself. Madam President, this observer group was here and took part as a mission to observe the processes involved in the conduct of general elections supervised by the Elections and Boundaries Commission of Trinidad and Tobago. And in its report, in the foreword of its report for that elections in 2015, here's what the observer group had to say about the last general elections supervised by the very Elections and Boundaries Commission. These elections affirm Trinidad and Tobago's record of conducting credible and transparent elections and are a testament to the people's commitment to democracy. An overall assessment of these elections met all the key benchmarks for democratic elections. That is the Commonwealth Observer Group. And Madam President, before I move off the Commonwealth Observer Group, in its recommendations and conclusions, here's what they had to say. Trinidad and Tobago, polling was well managed and conducted peacefully in accordance with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. But hear this, Madam President. We wish to highlight the exemplary role played by the EBC, an institution that enjoys a high degree of confidence amongst the electorate and all the stakeholders that we met. That is the Commonwealth Observer Group that observed the 2015 elections, reporting on the conduct of free and fair elections in Trinidad and Tobago, accepted by all parties involved. What I do recall is that after the elections, some persons filed election petitions. You know, we have a scenario in Trinidad and Tobago where we refer to certain seats as marginal seats. It might surprise you, Madam President, that whilst those persons from the UNC filed petitions in respect of 5 of those so-called marginal seats that were won by the PNM on the basis that the EBC extended the voting hours after 6 p.m. for 1 hour because of bad weather. And although the facts will show that even if we gave all of the votes cast after 6 p.m. to the UNC, it still would not have changed the result of the election. The PNM is well elected into office. However, the two marginal seats that the UNC won, they accept those results. You understand the hypocrisy? So for the 2 seats that they won, it's no problem. The EBC decision is fine. But the 5 seats they lost, it's a problem. And it's the same sort of logic espoused by Senator Ameen, that where boundary changes are concerned, if the changes, according to her analysis, might benefit the PNM in an election, then the changes are no good. But where the changes place a benefit that she perceives might be a benefit for the UNC, those changes are in order. It is hypocrisy in the highest. It's either it's good or it's bad. You can't take some and leave the other. So in Debe, for instance, where a new seat is created and they expect that they will win that seat, it's fine. No problem. EBC nice, bunch of people. In Barataria Sanwo, where a new seat is created and they expect that they will win that new seat, nice EBC. Continue, trot along. But where in the Siparia Corporation, you find a change that might cause you to have some problems, I'll tell you we will win that seat whether the EBC change that whole division or not. When it is convenient for the UNC will make excuses when they know they are going to lose at the polls. And this is what this motion is all about. Madam President, you know, I expected a motion like this because when you listen to the campaign rhetoric coming from the UNC, you know where they're heading. So when you hear the leader of the UNC talking about plans to thief elections and so forth, you expect something like this to come to the parliament. But thief which elections? The PNM has participated in every single election pre and post independence in Trinidad and Tobago, has contested every single seat at both general, local and THA elections, and we can teach the UNC a thing or two about electioneering. What we know is that the Elections and Boundaries Commission has conducted itself above board in a professional manner and has conducted elections in a way that free and fair elections are held in Trinidad and Tobago. And the only bunch of persons who do not know that now is the UNC. Nobody else. Nobody else. Madam President, parliamentary oversight. That is the point made by the motion. Madam President, we receive in this parliament reports from the Election and Boundaries Commission. I think the UNC should be aware of that by now. The reports prepared in terms of boundary changes are laid in this parliament. It is the parliament where these reports are laid. As a matter of fact, the EBC has appeared before parliamentary committees in this parliament. Right? And
I'm hearing and I have asked members to desist from making comments across the floor. Okay? Continue, Senator Cummings.
thank you, Madam President. I understand the panic of the UNC because you see, to come up against the PNM is no easy feat. And therefore, I expect you to be jittery, but I expect you to be responsible. I don't expect recklessness. And when you want to attack an institution as the Election and Boundaries Commission, what the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago observing you are saying is that clearly you have lost your way. Because everyone knows, where's the evidence? A reporter called me over the weekend to make a comment on a statement by the leader of the opposition that there is some plan by the PNM to thief an election. I had to say to the reporter, you know, the PNM is not about stealing elections. We are an election machinery. We beat all comers. so that we don't have time. We spend our time trying to make sure that we stay in government, not by stealing an election. We know how to win elections. So where's the evidence? You know, you throw things out into the atmosphere in the hope of creating panic and mayhem and confusion in the society. Where is the evidence? Not one bit of evidence. Where's the evidence? If you go to the police to report a crime, then you have to present some sort of evidence. Where's the evidence? No, the election is going to be stolen. Election is not a mango on a tree. You don't just climb up and pick it and run away with it. There are several processes involved. At every step of the way, on polling day, you have observers from both sides. Votes don't run down the road and one grab one and throw it in a bag. How do you steal an election? But because I listened to absence of logic for 40 minutes, I made no complaint. But when you place the truth on the agenda, they get panicky. The fact remains, Madam President, that this motion, I will not say it is a waste of time, but this motion is not well placed. Senator Mark is a very experienced politician, a very experienced person in the politics, and he knows that the EBC is one of the institutions in this country. We might be able to look at one or two others that need some adjustments. But the EBC, one of the institutions in this country that has proven themselves and withstood the test of time. If it were not so, on occasions in the past, when the UNC did not perform too well at the polls, that would have been their first defense. But at no time have we heard any evidence of the UNC before, or even now with all of these accusations flying all over the place, that there's some credible evidence, and that's the point I make, Madam President. Madam President, you know, Trinidad and Tobago is a model country in the CARICOM and the Commonwealth. When you travel throughout the Caribbean region, people look to Trinidad and Tobago and model their conduct and their behavior and their governance after a lot of things that we do here. The news from Trinidad and Tobago is Caribbean news. Sometimes you go to a Caribbean country, you get news that you didn't even leave here knowing. They pay keen attention. So when we make statements as leaders, we have to take into account how we might be damaging the reputation of our country. And we can't be selfish about our comments. I mean, if you have evidence, as I said before, bring it forward. But in the absence of that, stop creating confusion. The EBC is an independent body. And the EBC has had several commissioners over time, several members of staff, etc. But one thing you know is that the Constitution guarantees protection in this country for the Election and Boundaries Commission against interference from outside elements. That is a guarantee in the Constitution. What is this new request that is being made? It is against the backdrop that in the second paragraph, the Election and Boundaries Commission is responsible for holding free and fair elections in Trinidad and Tobago.
Senator Cummings. Honourable Senators, at this stage, we will now move on to the urgent matter of public importance. May I remind members, it's for 1 hour. The first speaker, the mover of the motion, has 20 minutes. The first person to respond has 20 minutes, and thereafter, every other speaker has 5 minutes. Senator Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the patience of the people has dried up. It has dried up in the South, in the central, and it will soon drop in the north. Madam President, there's no doubt that there is a major water crisis in our country. And this crisis continues to cover dark clouds over our south and central communities in particular. We all recognize that water is a basic human right, and all efforts must be made to ensure that people have a regular supply of this vital commodity. The people in several communities in our country, particularly in the south and central, are no longer prepared to accept excuses from WASA and from the Minister of Public Utilities. These excuses are weak, they are lame, and they are outdated. Madam President, this is an island that gets rain consistently for 6 months of the year. And Madam President, we are surrounded by water. Yet our citizens are without water, and they are crying out for basic water to maintain their livelihoods. Madam President, if I were to take you to Mayaro Regional Corporation, there's only one water truck, yet no money to pay contractors. Even if they get additional trucks, WASA is unable to supply additional water. Madam President, WASA has one truck in Mayaro for 41,000 citizens. No money for more trucks. Contractors are not getting paid, Madam President. And therefore, what we are experiencing in our country today is unprecedented. Whether you are in Ottawa, Guayari, Grand Lagoon, Mafikin, Union, Ecclesville, Libreville, Poole Valley, Bristol, the cries are the same: no water. Madam President, how long can people continue with this kind of arrangement? Madam President, in places like Tableland for the last 2 months, New Grant, Warrell Road, there have been no pipe-borne water. For the past month in Matilda, Fairfield, Hindustan, St. Mary's, Pitimoon, there has been no water, Madam President. Schools have been shutting down classes and sending pupils home. For example, the Princestown Presbyterian #1 and #2 schools. Businesses are being severely impacted, especially farmers in the Tableland area. Madam President, farmers are losing thousands and thousands of dollars in crops and livestock. Today, Madam President, in that part of the country, Khorasan, Pitimoon, you have 2 government ministers, but they are absent from their constituencies. Moruga, Tableland, San Fernando East, Madam President, and there are water issues. Madam President, poultry shops and chicken farms are going under since they have to purchase water on a daily basis to operate and sanitize their business premises. Why is this happening? Madam President, we knew in advance that there was going to be a water crisis because of the drought that was coming. We were told, expect a drought, a dry season for 2019. What did the minister do? We have 27,000 leaks. 50% of our water, Madam President, is lost as a result of leaks in the system. What have we done? When the PNM came into office, one of the first things that it did under this minister was to get rid of all the contractors involved in the truck-borne water supply business. They say they saved money as a result of that, Madam President. And they got a local crew from within WASA in order to continue the work that those contractors were doing. But, Madam President, there has been a gap, and the government has not been able to fill that gap. Madam President, would you believe that citizens of our country have been called upon by these contractors, those persons rather, who are supplying water to them in the South? They are paying $500, $600, $800, $1,000 for a supply of water. Madam President, that is also coming on the heels where they have to go and meet their water bills every 2 months to WASA. So they are not receiving water, yet still they are being called upon to pay their bills, properly speaking, but they have to pay $1,000 for a truck-borne supply of water. Is that fair, Madam President? What is the government doing? Did not the government realize that we were going to be in a water crisis? We have the Minister of Public Utilities asking people to conserve water. How can you conserve water in South and Central Trinidad when there's no water? What are you conserving? What are you conserving, Madam President? Madam President, I don't want to believe, but I saw something that had me a bit concerned. And I think the minister needs to tell us what is going on. Is there geographical discrimination in the supply of water in Trinidad today? I am asking a question, Madam President. I'm not accusing anyone. But the question has to be asked. Since the PNM came into power, we have witnessed a crisis of water supply for the south and central parts of the country. And we don't know, Madam President, if a decision was taken to just redirect supply out of the Carney Arena to the north and west of the country. Because, Madam President, you will know, for the last 3 months, the only people who have been crying out for water, for water, for water in our country are the people from South and Central Trinidad. You're hardly getting complaints from the north of the country at this time as I speak. You're not getting no complaints from the western part of the nation. So is it, Madam President, we have water, but the water management is what is at issue? Is there equity, Madam President, in the geographical distribution of water in our country? I am asking the question because it is surprising. And Madam President, I live in the east. I am not in the north in that strict sense in terms of the west of our country, although I was born there. But Madam President, we have not been getting any complaints thus far in any serious way. So the question that people are asking in the south of the country and in the central parts of the country is whether the government is not engaging in a kind of practice that is not in the best interest of the entire Trinidad. And therefore, I'm calling on the minister to answer the question whether the management of the distribution of the water supply, as scarce as it may be, Madam President, is that the issue? Madam President, you need water, I need water to bathe. I need water to wash my clothes. The people need water to drink. They need water and so on to go in the bath. Madam President, you know, I was reading a story in one of these articles that I have here, where an individual is saying from Penal that the government is supplying them with water at 12 midnight, as if they are Manikou people. So the government expect people to get up 12 o'clock in the night, Madam President, to get a few barrels of water filled. And after that, Madam President, there's no more water for the rest of the week. Madam President, I am getting stories where people have not had water for 6 months. Some people have not had water for 3 months. Some people have not had water for 2 months. How can that be real? Is the minister not aware of what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago? And Madam President, if it is that we have a limited supply of water at this point in time because of the crisis brought about by the harsh dry season, isn't it rational, Madam President? Isn't it, for instance, reasonable for the government to have a program of equitable distribution of the water? If the northern part of the island have to go on a schedule in order for the southern parts and central parts of our island and the people to get some water, Madam President, that is what we have to do. You cannot be supplying one part of the country with water on a regular basis and there's no complaints and you have citizens, you know, literally crying out. Madam President, if this thing goes on, I want to warn this government, you know, there was a water riot that burned down the Red House, you know, in 1903. I'm not saying, Madam.
No, I know you said,
Yeah.
Please, I'm allowing you to make your presentation. And you're making it in very strong language at times, but don't go there where you just went, okay?
Yeah. So, Madam President, I'm saying to the government that they should take some action to deal with this water crisis. It is reaching dangerous levels in this country. And before we know it, something can happen. I want the government to take heed of what I'm saying. Madam President, we are not without, for instance, proposals or recommendations. We believe that the minister ought to consider recommendations in this regard. Madam President, there at least should be one truck-borne supply of water per electoral district. You have districts in the south of the country, in the central parts of the country. Put a truck-borne supply in that district, Madam President, and let them supply water to the people. Madam President, why is the minister and WASA did not embark on what is called the drilling of wells, knowing fully well, Madam President, that a dry season was approaching? The government was not managing the affairs of the country properly. Madam President, if we were in Cuba today, you never have a crisis like that because they plan in advance and they take care of their people. But in this society, Madam President, anything goes. The government needs to pay attention to this particular crisis, Madam President. Right? Madam President, we believe that the government, where the farmers are concerned, should allow our farmers to dig their own wells for water supply to their farms.
Senator Mark, you have 5 more
Right. Madam President, let the farmers engage in that. And I want to call on the Minister of Public Utilities, right? Madam President, I'd like to call on the Honorable Minister to look at this issue very, very carefully. When I look at the newspapers today, and for the last couple of days, Madam President, you see some headlines which I can't display, I can just read. WASA accused, the headline that is in the Newsday, Madam President, right? 2 days ago. Headline, WASA accused of geographical discrimination. That is what people are saying. Water distress, April the 25th, 2019. Woodland protesters defy COP, light fires for water. This is in another newspaper dated Saturday, 9th of March, Madam President. MP warns of water uprising on April the 30th, 2019, Madam President. Lehunt, those with water conserve for those without. Madam President, the only way that can take place, and the Honorable Minister ought to know, you have to redistribute water. You have to redistribute water. Put the north and western parts of this country on a schedule. And Madam President, do you know that even though we have a schedule in South and Central Trinidad, it is most erratic and irrational in terms of when you cannot get WASA to come with water on a particular day. Madam President, the next time you get water is 2 and 3 and 4 weeks later because it is not properly done. Ducks, headline, dying for water. Friday the 26th of April 2019 in the Newsday. Lehunt, less than 30% get water 24/7. No water in Tableland for over a month, Madam President. That's another headline again, Madam President. South villages without water for weeks, according to an article in the Newsday, Madam President. And it goes on. So all over, Madam President, and you have the CEO in an article here in one of the newspapers saying, brace for more restrictions, Madam President. No water in parts of Central tomorrow, according to an article. WASA struggle to cope. Madam President.
No, you have to give me dates and the names of the newspapers.
All right. Well, this is The Guardian, one by Hassan Ali, and the date here, I have to get it from the library. Madam President, but I have made my points. I just want to wrap up at this time. I want to call on the government and the Minister of Public Utilities. Stop making excuses. Stop making excuses. Madam President, we have to do something. This is a national emergency in our country. Declare a state of emergency if it's necessary to ensure that South and Central Trinidad gets their fair and equal share as it relates to water. They pay their taxes, Madam President. They are entitled to water. They are entitled to a regular supply. And even though they can't get it 24/7, they can get it on a scheduled basis. So therefore, I call on the government and so on to take action before it is too late and do what is right. Distribute water in an equitable way throughout Trinidad for the time being. I can't talk for Tobago until I represent the people of Tobago at some time in the future. I can talk for Trinidad, and I'm saying let us deal with equity in the distribution of water for the people of our country. Madam President, I thank you.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam President, you know, this motion before us will give all of us the impression that the water shortages that we are currently experiencing across Trinidad and Tobago is something new. I think all of us live in this country and we know that is not so. Mr. Mark, one of his advice, and I will dive straight into it, talked about scheduling. Good advice, needs to be scheduled. The reality, as we all know it, is that Trinidad and Tobago, in spite of years of money, in spite of years of squandermania, in spite of budgets over 63 billion, in spite of budgets over 275 billion, in spite of a number of projects ill-fated projects, starting projects, $1 billion of money being spent without one drop of water being produced. After all of that, we operate in a country whereby we are on schedule. The truth of the matter is, let the facts be clear. Trinidad and Tobago, in spite of all the Water for All campaigns, as we like to talk about it, 50% of the population, maximum, during the wet season, gets water 24/7. During the dry season, that number goes to 35 to 40%. That is the reality. And the reality is that over 30% of the people who have water in this country, the population, gets water below the standards as recommended by the RIC. It's in the RIC reports. Less than 30% gets water on their recommendation is at least everybody should get a 24/3, 24/4, and less than 30% gets that. That means there have always been, from time immemorial, of people getting water 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. That is the situation under which we inherited. That is what prevails. And that, I said, that prevailed after a time when there was a lot of money in this country and a lot of money could have been spent in water. That's a fact. The fact is also, as we all know it, right, there are over 7,200 kilometers of pipe in this country, and we have an aged infrastructure. We have a structure with pipes that are over 75 years in the ground, more than 50% of them. That's the reality. When there was money to be spent, and then there was money to be wasted, it was not spent in the proper direction. Again, I draw reference to the $1 billion project that produced not one drop of water. If that money was spent in a proper way, we would have had a lot of our infrastructure fixed. And therefore, we are where we are because, and I, as this minister, want to apologize on behalf of all the other ministers, and especially those of the last government, ministers responsible for water, for to the citizens of this country, for the broken promises that they have made over time in giving them hope and then dashing that hope every time with non-performance. That is what it is. So let's not try to politicize the situation now and all of that and make this thing hype like if it is something that we have now gotten up this morning and we are in a crisis. We are in a crisis situation now. Why? We are in a crisis situation that has been exacerbated because of the climate situation we are in. I want to read a quote that that came out of the Met Office. The Met Office sends, as you said, in December and in January, they gave an update. And they said a hot and harsh 2019 dry season is forecasted. One when every drop of rainfall and water counts, and when rainfall will be scarce as gold. The reality is, that was the forecast. That was the forecast which we envisaged. And I could say to you, based on where the dam levels are, the forecast has given rise to coming a little bit, in some cases, worse than we expected. Especially in certain parts of the country, we have situations that are worse, and therefore we are averaging 20 to 30% below the national average of where the dams should be. That is another part of the reality that we face. We also, and what makes this situation worse, is that we operate in an environment where 60% of our water comes from surface water. So if that is your predicament and you have these harsh climate conditions that are facing before you, you are going to be in a dangerous and perilous situation. WASA's response to that was very quick. WASA's response was very quick. And by January of this year, we were out there letting the population know very clearly what was before us. And they put out a four-pronged attack in trying to deal with the situation. And that plan involved increasing storage capacity, because that's another problem. That's another problem that the country faces. And again, while we're talking this glib talk about water for all, the reality is our storage capacity in Trinidad and Tobago is such that we are about 7% of what it should be international standards. So we have never invested, when we had money, in the increasing our storage capacity. And therefore, this is not something that you could get up in the morning and fix. This requires capital, this requires some planning, and therefore when the situation was supposed to be done, when we had abundance of money, it was not done. So WASA decided what we had to do in light of the situation. So what we had planned was increase storage capacity, increase water supply, reduction of non-revenue water, and a public awareness campaign. We put together a 4-point emergency plan. And I must say, I have been one that have been talking and criticizing and has spoken and had some serious words to say at WASA. But in this case, WASA has executed their plan in keeping with the constraints under which they're operating. And I continue to remind everyone of the old age infrastructure that we are carrying along while we execute this plan. So increased capacity, storage capacity. What have we done? We have engaged so far. We had put in place to have 4 storage tanks, right? We have already constructed 3 of them, and we are in the process of filling the 4th, of increasing that capacity in critical areas. Increasing the water supply. We have identified 13 wells were identified, 4 in Tobago and 9 in Trinidad, for immediate increasing in groundwater and drilling the wells. Those projects have already started and they're well on their way. We identified 46 wells because we recognize that we need to increase the production from the wells that are presently there. 46 wells that needed to be rehabilitated and cleaned out and dealt with. Out of those wells, by the end of this week, all 46 of those wells would have been cleaned and rehabilitated and up to maximum production coming out of the wells. Increased trucking facilities. Well, you talked about 1 per area. I will let you know that we have actually increased our trucking capacity by up to 60%. All right? And by the end of this week, we will have close to 41 trucks that are out there delivering water throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We have also commissioned a community water program. And for those of you all who don't know, there are places in Trinidad and Tobago, in this country, that spent $63 billion in budgets when there was lots of money spending, that do not have water at all. There are communities, not in South, in a lot of them in the East-West corridor, under which they do not get water, period. They don't even have the piping to get water. And therefore, we have started a community program that is putting pipes into those areas so as to give them water. Under the NRW program, we recognize and we talked about the leak repair program and putting down the pipe replacement. Again, if you want to change 50% of the pipes, that is a tremendous amount of money. The $1 billion that was spent that didn't give us 1 drop of water, we could have changed out a lot of pipes with that money. We are moving now and we are presently replacing the pipes as they come up, and we are doing that. We have moved and changed over 7.5 kilometers of pipe that we are presently replaced during this particular period. And we have heard a lot of people talk about WASA and their leaks. And I have been one that has publicly been out there. And let me say, Senator Mark, that we have not, the contractors that you are speaking about, we did not reduce any contractors as it relates to water truck delivery. That is not what we did. What we did do is that the amount of excess people that we had using contract labor to fix the leaks on the ground whilst paying over 5,000 workers at WASA, we recognized that was wasting Trinidad and Tobago money. And therefore, what we said is that if you have workers, we are going to keep the workers at WASA, but they need to work. And I'm pleased to advise, give WASA, that the amount of leaks that we have in South Trinidad, which we have concentrated on now, has moved from over 600 in January down to about 120. That's the amount of leaks. Recognize, by the way, that because of our infrastructure, WASA gets about 150 leaks a day. So you close your eye, 150, you go to bed, 150. So over the weekend, if you don't work, you start and you open your eye and you close your eye and you come back in the morning and you have 300 leaks. That's it, right? So in South Trinidad, based on the work that they have been doing, we have been able to reduce the number of leaks in South Trinidad down to 120. And in North Trinidad, which started at somewhere like 2,200 leaks, they are now down to 1,100 leaks. So we still have a way to go in the number of leaks that we have, but I could tell you the response time from the people at WASA has been a lot more, has increased, and the amount of leaks that we have in the country has dramatically been coming down. That is what we have been doing to fix the problem, not only talking about it. We have recognized that we had to beef up our call center because a lot of people have been calling and saying, listen, when they call in, they can't get through to WASA. All right? And we have increased our call center staffing by almost 30% and improved that level of service at the call center. Finally, of course, I think every radio station, I think I have even made myself a little TV star with an ad that is out there that has our program since January of public awareness and asking every single one that every drop counts. Every drop counts. And you're right when you heard the headline. What I talked about, I appealed to every single citizen of this country. Not those that didn't have water, that we want to make a fun and game about it. Of course, if you don't have water, you can't conserve. But we have water coming from one source. And those who are getting water, if they conserve, then you will have more water to send to someone else. This is not time to make politics and play games and say, look at that statement. That's a sensible statement. That is what people need to do. That is what we all need to stand up and say, yes. Let's do something together rather than making small political games out of everything and making it all seem like if I am bad and you are good. When we all know when you had the money to do things about it, you wasted it and you didn't do anything about it. So come on, man. So at least come. Let's work on this together.
Minister,
we are sending messages. The reality is...
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
The reality is, in certain areas, we recognize and I have seen the problems in Miaro, and I've seen the problems in Central Trinidad, and I've seen the problems in Penal area. The reality is there were some technical problems in the Navet Dam, in addition to reducing the water supply in that particular area from 50. Water supply has come down from 20 million gallons a day down to 15. So there is reduced. And then there was a breakdown, a mechanical problem in the particular dam that caused problems. And therefore, that is why the people of Miaro is having problems. That has been fixed and their problem is being restored, but you are back up to capacity and you are down to 1 or 2 days, and therefore it will take a while to regularize. In the Central Trinidad, which by the way, is one of the few areas in Trinidad that gets water out of the desalination plant, and they get water 24/7. But there are certain pockets of areas that we are right now. WASA has also advertised that they have a valve. It's a mechanical problem. There's a valve that was playing that has malfunctioned, and there are certain works that needs to be done that will rectify the situation there. All right? And in the penal area, again, the penal area, and I want to take last 2 minutes and deal with this whole idea of discrimination. There is no concept. The concept of discrimination is something that there is no ground or basis for that. WASA sends approximately, has reduced their water from the Caroni water treatment plant. It is down from 72 million gallons of water a day down to 60. It came down to 50. And that is why the people in the penal area had some problems. All right? As a result of that problem, 28 million gallons comes up north, and about 30 to 31, or vice versa, 31 million gallons comes north, and 29 million gallons goes south. But in addition to that, south gets water from the desalination plants and other areas. When you total it, north gets approximately 87 million gallons of water, and south gets approximately 85, 86 million gallons of water. There is no discrimination. As I told the person, the person in charge of the Superior Regional Corporation, my parents come from Superior. I grew my whole life up in Faizabad. I went to school in Superior. All my family is in Superior. All my other families in Rio Clara, Miaro. All right? And what I'm trying to say, if there was discrimination, there is no discrimination. There is no discrimination in wanting to not send. There were technical issues that needed to be dealt with, and they have been dealt with. This government has been looking and dealing with the WASA issue. We inherited a lemon. We inherited a lemon. We inherited a situation, and we inherited at a time when we had money. We wasted the money, as the previous government has done on a number of other occasions, and they did not spend the money in the proper way. With a little bit of diligence, with a little bit of honesty, with a little bit of focused attention, we will get there. And we are getting there in a deliberate manner. And we are addressing the situation as it relates to WASA in a deliberate, focused manner, without one set of bravado and one set of promises and fake promises that will get us nowhere. As I said before, we are in a crisis situation. I am asking all citizens who have water to conserve water. We are asking, we have pockets of areas that had particular mechanical problems. I apologize to those areas. And we are putting things in place to ensure that those areas are rectified. The WASA team was down in Penal with a public meeting on Friday. I have been in constant contact with the MPs of those areas. Every night I get calls from them, and I send the necessary problems in dealing with the particular areas. We are dealing with a situation. Let's not politicize it. Let's take this opportunity to work together in dealing with a problem as we serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, what I heard from the Minister of Public Utilities are blames, excuses, and no hope for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. After we finish here today, the taps will still be dry in Central, South, East, and North Trinidad, Madam President, and parts of Tobago. This PNM government is good at one thing, and that is engineering a crisis. They always engineer a crisis before they address the issue.
And blame the opposition.
Madam President, you will remember they collapsed the sea bridge, and now what they are doing? They're turning off the water from the taps of the citizens of this country. Madam President,
no, Senator Hussain, please. Please.
Madam President, all that came out of the minister's contribution is that they have no money to do anything. that the country is broke, they have no money to do anything. But if they prioritize their spending, Madam President, today the people of Trinidad and Tobago will have water flowing in their taps. The minister insulted a $1 billion project that was started by a UNC government. And he said we spent $1 billion, Madam President. But the record will show that we did not spend $1 billion on the project. Madam President, $426 billion was spent for the start of the project that was shut down by this PNM government. You know what they did, Madam President? The citizens of this country were robbed from 11 million gallons of water per day from that plant. Had you continued that plant, Madam President, the people of Trinidad and Tobago would not be suffering here today.
Definitely.
You would remember the PNM spent $1 billion on a stadium in Taruba that does not produce one drop of water. That is their priority. But the minister said something very instrumental. He said, since last year, it was forecasted. He knew that this was going to be a harsh, dry season. We're what, four months is almost finished in the year. And you know what he did? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. No contingency planning whatsoever. And he had the forecast on his hands. Could you imagine, Madam President, that Trinidad and Tobago was flooded in October? Flooded. Persons have to be evacuated from their homes. And that water has not been conserved for production, for use by the citizens of this country, based on what we are facing right now. But he said that in our tenure, the 2010-2015 period, there was abundance of money. Well, Madam President, the period before 2010, they have amnesia because there was more money at that point in time. Do you know what they left the People's Partnership Government with? With 15% of the population in Trinidad and Tobago having water, and in Tobago, 35%. When we demitted office in 2015, Madam President, the water supply in Trinidad went up to 57%, and in Tobago went up to 69%. 24 million gallons of water per day has been increased through 10 million gallons in the Desalcott plant, increased aquifer well production of 1.1 million gallons per day, increase in production of 1.5 million gallons per day at the Point Fortin desal plant in order to provide water for the Namdevco estate for the Mitsubishi plant. And that is what we did. That is where the money going, Madam President. That is where the money going. We completed 753 projects, laying 564 kilometers of pipeline. That is where the money went. In the first quarter of 2014, a total of 82 kilometers of mains were installed in 4 areas. What did they do? Come here to complain about a valve being malfunctioned, and that is the justification you are going to give for people who don't have water in their pipes to send their children to school, for business to operate, for families to have water to drink, Madam President. It is a shame on this government. It is an absolute shame and embarrassment on this government. But the people...
Senator Hussain, your time is up. Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
But, Madam President, 5 minutes intervention. But let me see. I feel very saddened this evening that we have taken a national crisis of water and delegated to this type of debate. Madam President, I'm a petroleum geologist, and I'm also versed in hydrogeology and hydrology. I served on the board of WASA from 1986 to 1990. I understand the water supply situation in the country. Trinidad has 3 sources of water. Surface water, where you have impounded reservoirs. Hollis, to a lesser extent, North Overpooch, Caronia Arena, and Navet. There's a desalination complex at Couva Point Lisas that provides, I think, 20-something% of the national supply. And then there's a groundwater system. The vast majority of the potential of the groundwater lies on the foothills of the northern range, in what we call the alluvial valley fans, where all these water wells are drilled. There's a smaller supply of groundwater in central Trinidad in what is called the Sum reservoirs and down in the Southwest Peninsula, which the oil field has used for centuries, not for centuries, for decades. And they supply the South to a limited extent. So while the potential of a well in the Queen's Park Savannah or in the Mocha Valley is over 350,000 barrels a day. If you go down to Chatham, you're lucky if you get 100,000 barrels a day. So, and then we're faced with a severely harsh dry season. I think I have been a critic of WASA for years. I think WASA has managed this crisis to the best of their ability. And while for those who have water that brings no comfort to them, I still want to publicly compliment those who don't have water. There's no comfort to them, to how they have managed it. From very early, they telegraphed through the Meteorological Office that there will be a harsh dry season. The issue with impounding reservoirs is evaporation. So during the dry season, you start with a lot of water. You manage the drawdown on the reservoir. But then the more you manage it, the more you lose through evaporation. But at the end of the day, the cheapest water is still surface water. Desal, in my view, Trinidad shouldn't have no desal plant, but it has helped out. Because we have a tropical equatorial climate, and we have the highest rainfall in the Caribbean, outside of Guyana. So we're not Aruba or Curacao. But we have that. And then there's the groundwater aquifers, where I think we have the greatest potential. As we speak, I chair a cabinet committee that is looking at groundwater supply. As the minister said, the infrastructure is aged. Pastor Pandey, Prime Minister then, water for all by 2000. I'm not bringing the politics in it, but everybody has always telegraphed a mission for WASA. Somehow it has never happened. The quantum of leaks, the non-revenue water is too high. Let me just read to you, Madam President, the consumption pattern. I have a graph here of consumption gallons per capita per day. The international standard is 42 gallons per day per person. The Bahamas is 21. They know how to conserve water. Jamaica is 35. They know how to conserve water. Barbados is 60. Not quite good, but reasonable. Madam President, the consumption per capita in Trinidad and Tobago is a staggering 90 gallons per day per person. You don't have enough water in this country, surface from impounding, desal, or groundwater to supply that ridiculous demand. And the behavior pattern is what counts. But people who have 24/7 living their life as normal, you know.
Minister, your time is up.
Okay,
Senator
thanks.
Haynes.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll start this at the same point that the Minister of Energy started. I too am saddened to have to be talking about water supply in 2019 and people protesting for basic needs such as water. But Madam President, in the 4-year tenure of this government thus far, this is the second urgent motion that this opposition has had to bring on something such as water supply. And that, quite frankly, is unacceptable, Madam President. Imagine, Madam President, that the Minister of Public Utilities could come here and list out a litany of woes, all of which are under his direct responsibility, things that he ought to be fixing, Madam President, and then still manage to try to put the blame on a former PNM, on a former UNC administration. And today, I think, Madam President, I was in shock because just before, and on motion we were debating before, you had members come and tell us how the PNM is good at winning elections and how many elections they've won and how long they've been in power. And you want us to share the blame for the water wars in 2019? Madness, Madam President. Either you were in charge all this time, you win all these elections, you do so, and You could say that and then take all the blame for the water supply in 2019. But don't come and tell me in the last 5 years, a People's Partnership administration created this problem because, as the Minister of Labour said in Crosstalk, you cannot be half pregnant. You was in charge, you didn't fix anything, it's your fault now, Madam President. And you know, I listened to the Minister of Public Utilities and the Minister of Energy both say, let us not politicize this issue. Please. I mean, I was grateful, very grateful to the Minister of Energy for acknowledging for the first time that there is a crisis, and that is the fact. I was also amazed, Madam President, that while saying don't politicize it, we had 20 minutes from the minister, from the line minister, that was purely political rhetoric. Not good political rhetoric, but just pure political rhetoric. Talking about, and you know, the Minister of Energy came here and gave us his take on the situation. Now, I heard one of my colleagues say he should get a job, but this is the minister that shut down Petrotrin, right? I don't think anybody wants him to get any job near Wassa.
Is that please? Or
Yes, Madam President. This is the minister, that is the line minister for energy, where we saw a similar crisis, Madam President. But why I brought up Petrotrin is because we were promised better services. Once you shut down this Petrotrin, right, you would have more money for this, more money for that. Right now, your pocket's dry, your pipeline dry, everything is dry under this PNM administration. And you want to tell us now about crisis? No, Madam President. And when we were listening, there was a protest happening today, Madam President. People in Mayaru, Maruga, Tableland, all of them protesting today, Princestown, for water. And we look on at it, and this is a government that is in Maruga promising them a port. You're promising people all kind of things with water, but no actual water supply. They're in San Fernando promising waterfront development, but no actual water. You could get anything with water in it except actual pipe-borne water under this PNM administration. Amazing, Madam President. You know, and as you talk about how many elections you could win and what you could do, when you go to these people to ask for them to vote for you, don't carry music trucks behind you, eh? Make sure and carry them water trucks, you promise, because that is what they're asking for. Basics, Madam President, in 2019, and I have said this before, under this PNM administration, we have been taken backwards. 2019, in a year where people are talking about STEM and research and robotics, we in Trinidad and Tobago are talking about pipe-borne water supply. Unacceptable, Madam President. And you could stand here and tell me not to politicize an issue and not to raise it in this manner. But when you were running your public awareness campaigns and talking about conservation and what was it, 1 minute showers, etc., you were also at the same time granting permits for people to have wet fets in this carnival season and carrying truck-borne water supply for wet fets. And telling us that the problem is us, the problem is the citizens. You don't know how to conserve water. Problem is you. You really don't know how to prioritize. You couldn't prioritize your spending in previous administrations. You could not prioritize and you could not plan for a crisis that you admitted that you knew about. And that is where I think if anything comes out of this debate,
your time is up, Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I keep hearing the word crisis. And this is just the reality, Madam President. I heard my colleague, Senator Hussain, talk about the PNM is good at engineering a crisis. But the fact is, Madam President, we have no rain, and we rely on rainfall to replenish the dams. We have no rain, and we have what WASA says is record low levels already in the dams. And Madam President, the Met Office has said to us that May is going to be even more severe in terms of the heat. So we have a reality to deal with. And we could talk about, in the long term, about desalination, about new dams. We could talk about, all the things, engineering that we could do. But the fact is that this is the situation we find ourselves. We're not unique. And everybody is talking about politicizing and don't politicize. But it's affected both of us. Senator Mark has read a number of newspaper headlines. I could read newspaper headlines too, Madam President. August 8, 2015, Trinidad Guardian, water crisis in Tobago. February 3, 2012, Newsday, WASA grants 5.2 million contract to Spanish firm. And this is what this Newsday article says. News of the award of the contract came as the Parliament today is set to debate a motion to approve increases in WASA rates for the Point Lisas Industrial Estate. It also comes after several months of complaints over the operations of WASA, including the recurrent problem of chronic water shortage and shutdowns. And that is not even, that is February in the dry season 2012. Let us go to July 12, 2013, Trinidad Guardian, headline, water supply shortage in various areas. July 12, 2010, that's when we facing flood. And the article from the Guardian says, and I quote, low water pressure and in some cases total lack of water is expected to affect several areas in central and south Trinidad. So if the PNM is engineering problems to the people in south and central Trinidad like me, then the UNC was doing it in July 2013. And Senator Mark, you contested 3 elections, you know half the country. Well, this article, July 12, 2013, referred to some of the affected areas, and it sung like a calypso. Claxton Bay, Macale, Debe, Caratal, Pinal, Hermitage, Woodland, Union Road, Rosilac, Labre, San Fernando, Gulfview, Sobo, Duncan Village, Vance River, Vesigny, Pleasantville, Union Hall, Faizabad, Quarry Village, Philippines, South Oropuch, La Romaine, Palmi, Siparia, Palo Seco, July 12, 2013. Madam President, what we are dealing with, July 4, 2013, every year we have a situation. Yeah.
Senator Ameen, stop it. Okay? And this is the last time I'm warning you. Continue, Minister.
My point, Madam President, is that we as legislators have certain responsibilities. There are agencies responsible for water, WASA being one. We've read, we know about the issue with the leakage. We can't create more water. We depend on the rain to replenish the dams. The dams are at record low levels. The levels are only going to go in one direction over the next month. It's going to go lower. The place is going to get hotter. It's going to be more uncomfortable for our citizens. And this has nothing to do with PNM engineering a crisis. It has nothing to do with UNC engineering a crisis. It has nothing to do with North versus South or South versus Central or anybody versus Mayaro. This is something that is affecting around the world. It has to do with climate, and as a country, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it in terms of our own water usage. And of course, you can come up with all your lovely plans for dealing with it in the future. We are open to that. Madam President, I, like all the citizens who are suffering, I have my constraints, but I've always tried to conserve water by limiting how much I use. And May is a very critical month in the country. Whatever role you play in this country,
Minister.
May is critical.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Obika.
Madam President, people in Trinidad and Tobago are suffering for water, but instead,
Senator Obika, but I'm not suffering from a lack of hearing. I can hear you. You can lower your voice, please.
instead they are getting water lined by the PNM government. So what the government should do is advise the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities to do like the water in the pipes and leave.
He should resign.
He should resign.
Yes.
Because there are people in Princestown boiling river water to drink. People drilling their own holes. They're going back 500 years in this country, Madam President. So this government is drowning in incompetence, suffering from a drought of ideas, and the people are the ones who have to pay.
Yes.
If I were to read this list, I run out of time, but all I will say is one thing. The government, just as they have done with water, will get water lined by the people when the elections are called. I thank you, Madam President.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 7th of May at 1:30 p.m. We plan to hopefully complete 2 bills. The National Emblems Bill, which I hope should be a short debate, and then we will attempt to conclude the Liquor License Act.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for 2 matters to be raised. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the first matter deals with the arrival of 3 oil tankers out of Venezuela. Madam President, there is need for the government to properly answer the precise arrangements, contractual or otherwise, between the management of Trinidad Petroleum Holding Limited and its various subsidiaries and PDVSA, and any or any of its subsidiary companies. Madam President, on April 4th, 2019, the Serengeti left Venezuela and entered into Trinidad and Tobago waters on April 6th, 2019. This 800 feet oil tanker spent the night at Chaguaramas and departed on April 7th, 2019. This apparently was no cause of concern, and for that matter, was not even detected, as stated by the Minister of Energy in response to an observation made by an international journalist concerning false berthing of PDVSA vessels in Trinidad and Tobago waters. Madam President, to add insult to injury, 2 other vessels or oil tankers, namely the Mindoro and the Amore Mio, I understand it's my love, entered Trinidad and Tobago's waters through the Bocas del Dragon on the 23rd of March, 2019. In reference to the Mindoro, the minister is reported to have stated that this vessel entered TNT waters, called at Chaguaramas, as confirmed by the Director of Maritime Services. However, what is rather alarming about the Amore Mio is that the minister was told that there were records of the said oil tanker entering Trinidad and Tobago waters by the Maritime Division. This is in stark contrast to the automatic identification system called the AIS data, which reflect that this vessel not only entered the Chaguaramas area, but proceeded past the ports of Port of Spain and Point Lisas and journeyed to Pointe-à-Pierre, where it spent the night, leaving in the wee hours of the morning of March the 24th, 2019. Madam President, this government must explain why these vessels were in our waters completely undetected and unannounced by the Maritime Division, which appears to be like Rip Van Winkle snoring away in the wake of this development. Madam President, this is taking place in the wake of the recent discovery of some $120 million worth of cocaine in the rudder well of the Hispania Spirit earlier this month. The question has to be asked, what is really going on. Madam President, we wish to debunk, based on AIS data and contrary to the statement made by the Maritime Division of the Ministry of Works and Transport, that the lone vessel which arrived last month visited for supplies. The mystery deepens. The question is, Madam President, what supplies did this vessel come to take on board, in that it only left the Venezuelan port 2 days before? So what supplies did it come to take? We would like the minister and the government to please explain exactly what supplies this vessel took on board when it arrived here. In fact, the country is asking what arrangements are in place, contrary to US sanctions between PDVSA and the Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company. Madam President, this is an extremely grave and deeply concerning matter, especially in light of the recent drug fine valued, as I said, at over $120 million, as well as the US imposed sanctions on countries' shipping lines and even individual vessels which may have been found assisting or facilitating the Maduro regime to evade US sanctions. Madam President, I think the government owes the country a proper explanation and not a dismissal. It is either the maritime director is misleading the minister, or the maritime director is part of a huge cover-up on what happened on that particular period that we are examining. 3 vessels came into our waters. He is claiming, Madam President, only 1 vessel came. And when we look at the AIS information, Madam President, the tracking of the information from the AIS, we are seeing, and I have the evidence to show the minister, 3 ships left Venezuela, and they all arrived in Port of Spain. 1 went straight to Pointe-à-Pitre, Madam President. So I think that this is a very serious matter, because the US government is going to they are imposing sanctions on any country, or any vessel, or any individual, shipping lines that is, that are found to be in collusion, facilitating, seeking to evade the US sanction. So I want the government to do what is right. Explain to the country whether this country is facilitating or assisting PDVSA. And if there's any contractual arrangement involving that oil giant and the petroleum holding company of Trinidad and Tobago. Because, Madam President, US sanctions are very serious, and we believe that the government owes us an explanation to deal with this matter rapidly. So I look forward to the Minister clarifying this matter.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industry.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, UNC at work again. Ever since the government of Trinidad and Tobago signed the Dragon gas deal with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The Bolivian Republic of Venezuela. All hell broke loose in the UNC because we guaranteed a long-term supply of gas. In the event that Trinidad has a gas deficit, we can access the voluminous reserves in Venezuela through a transparent commercial relationship that could keep our lifeblood going, which is Point Lisas, which is Atlantic LNG. We are struggling with BP and Shell now for them to continue their upstream investments. And they are doing well because February gas production was 4 BCF. It's the first time it has reached 4 BCF since March of 2015. So every time something happens in Venezuela, they want to know what is the status of the Dragon deal. It collapsed, it this, it that, the other. Will a regime change stop it? I keep saying, I am not dealing with foreign policy. The Ministry of Energy, through the government, through the operators, which is Shell, PDVSA, and NGC, has put together a robust commercial arrangement that could stand scrutiny for any administration in power, in Trinidad or in Venezuela. They wouldn't see power in Trinidad, but I challenge any government that comes into power in Trinidad to cancel the Dragon deal. They wouldn't. Common sense will have to prevail. Good sense will have to prevail. So since then, everything that happened in Venezuela is a national crisis for Trinidad. If Venezuelan migrants come in here legally and illegally, they coin the question in such a way how we accommodating them to save the Dragon deal. I mean, donkey logic, is that a proper? All right, yes. Now, this article was a headline on The Guardian. Again, the media. Some agency, international agency, and I'll read a part of it. There are reports of Trinidad and Tobago ports being used by the Venezuela state oil company, PDVSA, to avoid US sanctions. According to a report on the website of Lloyd's List Marine Intelligence, ships appear to be collecting cargo in Venezuela before stopping off in Trinidad and then setting off again, raising suspicions that cargoes are being hidden. It said that PDVSA is suspected of using co-loading and false berthing, changing the bill of quantities to disguise cargo origin. It's a serious maritime offense with absolutely no evidence. Some international agency, they have international tracking system. They see a cargo coming here. The facts of the matter are as follows. There's absolutely no contractual arrangement between Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company, PDVSA, or any Venezuelan entity. The only agreement we have signed is the Dragon gas deal, which is the term sheet of the commercial arrangement, the gas sales agreement between the NGC, PDVSA, and Shell. The Maritime Service, this division, can attest that no Venezuelan flag oil tanker was in Trinidad during the month of April 2019. The three vessels that were named in the Lloyd's intelligence report, purporting to have some links to averting US sanctions on Venezuelan oil, namely the Mindoro, the Amal del Millo, and the Serengeti. The Mindoro, which flies a Malta flag, was last in Trinidad on the 23rd of March 2019, and it came for provisions, stores, and spares. Senator Mark implied you're leaving Venezuela just a couple miles away, and you're coming to Trinidad for provisions and spares. Venezuela doesn't have that. They collected a cargo. There's absolutely no evidence that you're changing the bill of quantities, not the bill of lading, to say the massive tanker of fuel oil has its origin in Trinidad. How you could justify that? Trinidad doesn't have that quantity of fuel oil. Trinidad doesn't even have a refinery now. That's kind of sound scrutiny, but that's media. And then the UNC picks up on all these things and make it a national public issue. On the 23rd of April, 2019, the agents for the vessel Serengeti, flying a Liberian flag, declared that the vessel was here for provisions, stores, and spares. It's obvious. They're going on probably a transatlantic journey. They're probably going to the Pacific to sell oil, to Japan or Korea. They need supplies. Venezuela doesn't have supplies. Trinidad businesses would have made money. Vessels visit here all the time, every day, regularly, every week, for all sorts of things. And the Amor del Mayo, and I admit that there was a little mix-up in information saying that that vessel didn't come to Trinidad. The vessel did in fact come, and it went to Point of Fear for bunker. Bunker is a legitimate business. Paria is involved in bunkering. Petrotrin was involved in bunkering. So here you have 3 vessels coming out of Venezuela on their own legitimate business. It has nothing to do with Trinidad. The shipping port under maritime law, you are allowed to let vessels boot for bunker, for supplies, and the agents handle that. So there's absolutely nothing sinister about what is happening here. And they are just trying to make an issue where none exists. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, we need to get clarification on another matter. We need to get clarification on the identity of the purchaser of TNT crude exports, as well as the companies from whom TNT receives its imported refined products. Madam President, it was on January the 18th, 2019, that the minister informed the House that the importation of fuel for local consumption was being supplied by BP International Sales and Trading, and that this country's crude exports were being purchased or taken or sold to Trafigura, ExxonMobil, Shell, and he also said Trafigura again. Based on research that we have conducted, it appears that the players on both the import side and the export side have changed without notification, explanation, or consultation with the people or their representatives in the Parliament. The question that has to be asked is, what is the new reality that this incompetent government has embarked upon? We need to get some answers. And I want to ask directly, Madam President, and I want the minister to answer in his response. Is there a processing agreement in place between PDVSA and Trinidad and Tobago through its energy-based state-owned oil companies, whereby, Madam President, our Molo crude is being exported to the Gulf Coast to be refined by PDVSA, related, affiliated, creditor-owned PBF Chamlet Refinery. The government needs to tell the country what is going on with our oil. Madam President, it was on the 6th of March 2019 that some, or approximately 525,000 barrels of Molo crude oil were exported from Heritage Petroleum via a vessel called the Eagle, Barcelona, with an API of 23.20, destined for PBF Holding Company, LLC, which is a subsidiary of PBF Energy, Inc., who is the second largest shareholder in a company called BlackRock Fund Advisors, or BlackRock Inc. Madam President, we need to get the facts right. We understand that BlackRock Inc. is the biggest creditor to the Venezuelan government and to PDVSA. However, Madam President, there was another shipment on the 9th of April, 2019. In fact, Madam President, let me go a bit earlier. A ship called the Songa Fortune brought a shipment of diesel fuel from PBF Chamlet Refinery, which started its voyage to Pointe-à-Pitre at midnight on the 16th of February 2019. This refinery is owned by PBF Energy, which allegedly purchased it from PDVSA in November of 2015. PDVSA is indebted to BlackRock Inc. or Fund Advisors. Madam President, it doesn't stop there. On the 9th of April 2019, another shipment of refined petroleum products left the port of Louisiana on the Mississippi River, Madam President, bound for Pointe-à-Pitre. The name of the ship is Alpine Hibiscus, and this vessel entered Trinidad and Tobago's waters within 1 week through the Bocas del Dragon on the 16th of April 2019. The shipment of refined petroleum products originated from the PBF Chamlet Refinery, located on the Mississippi River in Louisiana, located at 1 Coca Plant Road on the Mississippi River. Madam President, this PBF Chamlet Refinery has a coca unit which is designed specially to deal with heavy sour sulfur-laden crude, which is being imported from both Venezuela at an average of 78,000 barrels a day, as well as from Trinidad and Tobago Molo crude. Madam President, the question that is being asked is this. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, headed by the Honorable Prime Minister, signed off on several agreements with the President of Venezuela. However, Madam President, we never knew that the government had entered into a processing agreement between PDVSA and Trinidad and Tobago energy-based companies, whereby our Molo crude is being exported to the Gulf Coast to be refined by PDVSA, related, affiliated, or creditor-owned PBF Chamlet refinery. So we want the government to come clean with the population to let us know whether our crude that is being exported by these companies is being used as a cover to get our crude refined at the Chamlet refinery that is directly or indirectly owned by PDVSA. So we are exporting our oil to Venezuela, Madam President, and we are importing refined products from Venezuela. The government must tell the country what is going on, because when the minister addressed the parliament, Madam President, on January the 18th, 2019, the Honorable Minister of Energy is on record as saying that our oil is being exported and purchased by Trafigura, ExxonMobil, Shell. He never told us, Madam President, that our oil was being taken by PBF Energy. So we need to get the truth. Is the government in a deal with PDVSA? And are we selling our crude, Molo crude, to this plant in Louisiana? And we are importing the refined products to sell to the people of TNT without the knowledge of the people. Madam President, I call on the government to come clean on this matter. If you feel Emailgate was a joke, you come clean and tell the country. If you don't come clean, we have evidence. We have evidence. We have evidence. So I am calling on the minister to come clean and tell the country the truth on this matter. Otherwise, we shall expose you completely and comprehensively on this matter.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam President, when the Petroleum refinery ceased operation, or prior to its ceasing operation, there were inventories that came from the refinery. But we had guaranteed the nation a 3-month buffer to hold inventory so that in cases of emergency, there will be no fuel crisis in the country. So we started importing even before the actual drop-dead date of the refinery operation. I am on the record as saying, initially, and still we do that, we are playing this spot market. We have no long-term arrangement. They are traders, and we are getting good prices from the spot market. In terms of refined products, Paria Petroleum, Paria Trading Company that is, has from October 20th, 2018 to February 15th, 2019, got its imported fuel from BP North American Petroleum, a division of BP Products North America, Inc. These included gas oil, jet fuel, unleaded, super unleaded, premium. Then from January 20th to May the 31st, that's when the short-term contract expires. Atlantic Trading and Marketing, Inc., ATMI. These are traders. We don't ask you what refinery you own. We want something, it comes, we buy it once the price is reasonable. From January 20th, 2019 until May 31st, from January 2019 to 20th to May 31st, 2019, we have been getting supplies from PBF Holding Company Limited, LLC. Senator Mark is right. But there's no processing agreement between Trinidad Petroleum holdings with this company at all. We buy your products, we go on the spot market to sell the crude. If you buy it, other people will buy it. From April 29, 2019, to May 21st, 2019, we got some supplies from Petrojam and Vitol over that similar period. These are the companies. We cannot tell you what price we pay because it's a competitive market, and they will say you're giving discount to this one and you're not selling next door at a higher price. So there's transparency. It is a trading company. These are international commodities that are traded. They have posted prices and they have spot market prices. They have long-term contracts. The commercial arrangement for long-term contracts differ from short-term spot market prices. In terms of crude, I said the Molo crude, which is the local crude, it's fetching a significantly higher price for us than we thought it was ever worth. The reason largely for that is because of Venezuela low production, because Venezuela produces a lot of heavy oil. We produce heavy oil, but because Venezuela production has dropped from 3-point-something million to under 1 million now, this part of the world doesn't have much heavy crude. So we get in prices that is WTI plus $6 and $7. We used to post prices from E&P to the refinery at WTI minus $5. So that's 7 and 5, that's $12 extra per barrel you're getting. The companies that has provided over the period is Trafigura, Petrojam, Shell, PBF. Yes, PBF bought crude from us. They paid a premium, and where they carry it to refinance their business. Motiva, Trafigura, and Shell. If a U.S. company is caught doing transactions with PDVSA or the Venezuelan government, they are subject to U.S. sanctions. That has nothing to do with us. We are not subject to any U.S. sanction. We have a trader, we buy. If what Senator Mark is saying, that BlackRock Inc. is a U.S. company and they in some arrangement with PDVSA, I cannot comment on that. But Parlview Trading is buying refined products on the spot market. It is selling crude on the spot market. It is getting a significantly higher price than WTI for its crude because our crude is valuable as we speak. On the refined products, you have to be juggling because the market is very, very competitive. How much conspiracy that you could fabricate? There's a limit to it. Good? Look at the convoluted argument. They come like the Panama Papers. To try to build a case, to see that there is some possessing agreement between PDVSA and Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company Limited. I mean, everything, it's silly season, yes. But there's a limit to the silliness. Okay, and what I have told the nation today, Madam President, is that Parlview fuel is importing refined products at a fairly reasonable price. It is exporting Molo crude, which is the locally produced crude on the West Coast and land, at a significantly higher price than we ever thought it was worth. And in that context, Heritage is doing quite well. They will be declaring their first 6-month profit figures at the end of May, and we anxiously await to see what those figures are. I thank you, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 7th of May, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 7th of May 2019 at 1:30 p.m.